So there's both bad news and good news for the Big Ten. The bad news is the SEC is easily the best at producing NFL prospects. No one should be that surprised about this, but this really puts specific numbers to it. Last 10 years, 586 draft picks for the SEC across all 7 rounds, right? So they're generating 23% of all draft picks across the last 10 years. The Big Ten, though, the good news is we are clearly the second best. So we beat the ACC, Pac-12, and the Big 12. Those are the 3, 4, and 5s. So we're clearly the second best conference. 428 picks over the last 10 years, 17%. The other thing I just wanted to point out too, the last 4 years, that ratio of picks coming from the SEC and Big Ten is getting stronger. So the SEC and Big Ten, of course, everyone knows we're the strongest conferences. We have the most pull when it comes to things like TV revenues, et cetera. But the last 5 years, that's only getting stronger from a draft perspective. So if you combine those figures, for example, what is that? 42.6% in the last 5 years of draft picks come from the SEC and the Big Ten. That's really powerful. I mean, if you look at the ACC, they're clearly third. So in the last 10 years, 13.7% of picks came from the ACC, but that's down then the last 5 years, it's 12.6. Fourth is the Pac-12, 12.7% the last 10 years, but then it went down a little bit the last 5. And then really the last is the Big 12, 10.6% of picks coming from the Big 12 the last 10 years. That actually increased a little bit in the last 5 years. And the other thing to point out is the Pac-12 and the Big 12 did have 12 teams and we had 14, but really, that doesn't change the figures dramatically, right? The fact that a few conferences have more, that kind of holds here. So really, one of the things I am wondering, though, about this is the impact of the transfer portal. Maybe that will allow the Big Ten to close the gap some. I think you're seeing the ability of players to move quickly means they're going to be less patient to stay on the Georgia roster, the Alabama roster, wait till that starting spot opens. Now with the transfer portal, they're more going to say, hey, why don't I go to Purdue? Why don't I go to Rutgers? Why don't I go to Maryland and start right away? And then hopefully that player ends up being drafted from the Big Ten team. And that's where I think we could see, this is a theory, we could see improvement in these draft numbers. The other thing that needs to happen is better recruiting. And we're going to cover that in a different table. And we've covered that in a previous podcast. But, the SEC definitely is recruiting at a higher level, not surprisingly, than the Big Ten as well. But I think the Big Ten can improve from a recruiting perspective as well. Just a couple other things to note. If you look at that final row, so that's all the other conferences combined, row 6, other, right? One thing to notice, and I had highlighted in that light tan, the last 2 years, a lot less draft picks coming out of the non-Power 5. So only 44 draft picks outside of the Power 5 in 2024. I mean, if you went back to 2020, there were 63. There were 73 draft picks outside the Power 5 in 2018. So the bigger conferences are getting stronger. They're getting more of the better players. You're going to see the gap between them and the mid-majors get wider, I think. And I think some of that has to do with, NIL impacts, I would like to think, the last 2 years, right? The mid-major schools sign a player, they develop, they start to thrive, and then they don't have the money to offer them NIL to keep them, whereas a Big Ten team can come in and swoop in, give them NIL, bam, start, plug them in and start them and get going. So unfortunately, I think this NIL is really going to continue to see the weakening of the non-Power 5 in their ability to retain players and generate NFL draft picks. So that's a lot of information I threw at you, JR. Any comments from you on table 1 before we would open it to the audience and look at their comments?
Yeah, a couple things for me. I do think it's interesting, like you said, the past 2, 3 years of certain conferences, it's been down. In particular, the ACC, they were in 2022, they only had 21, and then 32 did grow up some there a little bit, and then 41 went on up as well. I can't help but wonder if it's possible that maybe players are transferring down from the Big Ten and the SEC, and that's helping their case. I mean, you even look at 2024, and the Big Ten only had 42. It was nearly tied with the ACC, and the Pac-12 themselves actually had more than the Big Ten overall that one year. So I'm curious your thoughts on players transferring down, the impact that has either from the Big Ten and the SEC, or even possibly players transferring down from the ACC, the Pac-12, and the Big 12.
Yeah, so one thing on the Big Ten, it's interesting. We're going to show this later when we look at the draftees by Big Ten team. One of the reason that figure is only 42 in 2024 is the fact that Ohio State retained so many of those seniors. There would have been 6 or 7 easily, maybe 8, 9 picks, right? Taking them into the low 50s if Ohio State wouldn't have gotten all those players to return back that led them to that national title run. So I think that's an impact there. It I like your theory on the ACC. I don't have the information to say yes, I know that is true. So I can't comment on whether I think that is true or not. But it really can vary year to year. I mean, I have highlighted 2024 in the Pac-12. They really did go out with a bang that year where you had Washington make the final, 2 teams threatening, basically them and Oregon in the top 5. You had a loaded quarterbacks and really it was a banner year for the Pac-12 in 2024, and it's reflected in these draft picks that you're hearing here because the 3 years before that they were in the 20s, right? So that's a dramatic change. But it really does show the Pac-12 was struggling. It was a real thing. I know they talk about, West Coast bias. The West Coast teams will say there's West Coast bias, not SEC. They're aware of SEC bias, but there's West Coast bias. But to me, that was legitimate because if you look at the Pac-12 numbers, I mean, in the low 30s, 20s, and only that last year of 2024 did they go in the 43s, right? And they still had 12 teams, right? So a good number of teams. I think it definitely was showing they were not producing in certain position groups as well. So I guess that would be my comment on that.
Okay, yeah, very good, very good. And then two more. The other one, and then I'll let you comment on this. Is the Big Ten had an outlier year at 55 in 2023. Like you said, in 2024 could have been because Ohio State brought so many players back. I still don't think they would have got up to 55 with Ohio State, but that
No.
was also the year when Michigan had all of their players going into the NFL draft. So I would think that would level out. Of course, we'll talk about teams and stuff like that here soon, but I mean, just generally before we talk about those teams, I mean, is it really that important that teams like Ohio State are putting that much NFL talent in that, one year when they maybe, bring some guys back instead of putting them to the NFL, the number can drop that low because that was the lowest number since 2019 for
Yeah.
the Big Ten. And the Big Ten has been growing. It's been over 40 ever since 2019. We're not in the 33, 35 like it was before that. So I do think that's good for the gap to close. But at the same time, it also looks like the SEC has been growing from that as well because they were in the 50s before that, and now they're consistently in the 60s.
Yeah, I do have a comment on that 55 figure in 2023. The drop off in 2024, a little hard to know. It's not just Ohio State, so there can be some other programs. Well, actually, I
Iowa
do.
did bring some players back. Iowa
Actually,
brought some players back too. But
well,
yeah, go
that
ahead. Sorry.
that that JR and the impact of NIL. So that number 42, I would argue, is now you can, even outside of Ohio State, you can give several $100,000 to a player to have them stay for another year, maybe improve their draft stock. So now it can really economically make sense, even if you're in the past, if you're a second or third round pick, you should go. You should really go. Third might be a maybe, but a first or second round pick, you should probably go. Now with
Right.
NIL, second or third round pick, get NIL money and then become a first round pick where you are slotted with a pretty, you know what you're going to get. That's really solid. And so I think that's an impact there. The other thing I think is in 2023, that's when Michigan was in their second or third year of being returning to true blue blood status. To me, those figures say that's how the Big Ten should have been all along. If Michigan was acting like Michigan should have, and Penn State was as strong as they should have, because they had a few leaner years going back in the James Franklin era, you need your blue bloods to be blue bloods to thrive as a conference. So I'm going to tie that back. I'm not Mr. I'm Big Jeff. I cover football, but I went to Indiana, so I know basketball. I blame a lot of the basketball issues on Indiana not acting like the blue blood they're supposed to in basketball, right? The blue bloods are the ones who are supposed to generating the NBA talent for basketball and the NFL talent driving that mostly in football. And so if your blue bloods are not acting like blue bloods, it really negatively impacts your conference. And in basketball, it's from an NCAA tournament perspective, but also we're not churning out NBA type players enough versus other conferences. As simple as that. I mean, need to recruit better. I think we develop well. We need to recruit better in basketball. Football, I think we're doing that. And with Oregon coming in, we'll be talking a lot of Oregon, see positive impact. And the other good thing is, I'm stealing the thunder, but all 4 Pac-12 teams we brought in were the 4 best at generating NFL talent. And they were the 4 best recruiters in the Pac-12. So we really got the best of the Pac-12, not just the biggest and the most money and the best brand. They were the best at recruiting, and they've been the best at generating NFL talent. And that's only going to help the Big Ten in the long run. It's a cool
interesting.
thing. Yep.
I was confident in that with Washington, Oregon, and USC. I was not as confident in that with UCLA, but that's good to hear and very, very interesting. So, all right, first round picks by conference. That one we touched on a little bit less, but I do want to bring it up here as went with the overall picks, less picks by the conference with only 4 in 2024. I'm curious, and I don't think you have these numbers, but maybe just speak on it if because you put together this data, so you might see some trends here. I would love to see the number of busts or players that didn't get a second contract that were first round picks from each of these conferences as well, because I mean I truly believe the Big Ten has more players that go to the NFL and are contributors on NFL rosters and stuff like that, and there are less busts from them. I know a lot of people would say, oh, but look at Georgia and Alabama. Sure, but I think there are programs in the SEC that get propped up, that their talent gets propped up because they're in the SEC, and they say, oh, okay, let's draft this guy as in the SEC, when in reality, that guy never belonged in, I shouldn't say never belonged in the NFL. He was not as good of a producer in the NFL as maybe an undrafted free agent from the Big Ten, or a guy that went later in the draft that was from the Big Ten, something like that. I mean, do you have any thoughts with busts and how that affects it?
So I don't, because I don't have the data, but maybe JR, just from the fact that, what we just talked about, less of the people being drafted from outside the big conferences. Maybe it's because the NFL is experiencing those players have not been battle tested as much, pushed as much and everything. And they turn out not to make it as much in the NFL. Right. And I actually didn't review the bottom information, but it's, only a few other things to point out. So Jerry, your theory there could hold, but it's certainly showing in fewer overall draft picks outside of the big conferences. You're seeing more draft picks in the SEC and Big Ten, because as we talked about, the 5-year numbers, the last 5 years, the ratio coming from the Big Ten and the SEC are increasing. And so that supports your theory, but I don't have the numbers specifically to show that. I did want to point out in this bottom, looking at first round draft picks, the reason I wanted to break that out, the first round draft pick, if you're a first round draft pick, you're an elite player. And elite players are difference makers. They're often the reason why you win a top 5 matchup versus another conference's team, right? They're the reason why you beat your rival. You need those difference making players. And the other thing to say is first round picks tend to be in marquee positions that are more important to winning, like quarterback, like defensive end, offensive line, defensive end, and cornerback. So quarterback,
Mm-hmm.
those are the marquee positions. Now, I don't have the data to show what percent of these are coming from those marquee positions, but we all know you can see the quarterback runs. Now you get the wide receiver runs. It's kind of nice. Running backs are coming into vogue a little bit more, but it used to be the case. You're a stud running back. You're a first round. That's not been the case anymore. But that's why first round picks are important, is just the ability to have those difference makers on the field in the vital positions that cause winning games. And actually the SEC, the numbers get even stronger for them as far as the percent of first round picks from the SEC goes up to 33% versus total draft picks was 23%. First round
Mm.
picks for the SEC goes up to 33%. And then the last 5 years, it even goes up more. The last 5 years, the SEC, 37% of first round picks are coming from the SEC. So they're still king. Now, there's good news for the Big Ten, though, JR. The percent of first round picks is also higher for the Big Ten than general draft picks, right? So Big
Yeah.
Ten is better at generating elite players than we are across all the other rounds. And it's only getting stronger. The last 5 years, 1 out of 5 first round picks are from the Big Ten. So that's improving. And we are by far the second best. Unfortunately, by far the SEC is first best at these, right? And then you can see the drop off here, folks. First round picks, the ACC is third best. Pac-12 is fourth best. Big 12 clearly the worst. In fact, pretty big drop off. That's the other takeaway here, by the way. The ACC and Pac-12 are pretty damn close together. I mean, they've been right there together. That intuitively goes with my perceptions, right? And now the Pac-12 is kind of no longer.
Yeah.
But the Big 12 was a big step back. So it's interesting. There's some arguments. This Big 10, are we going to? It's just kind of chaos and who's going to win it every year. And basketball becomes the strength for them. I don't know. But again, this tells the tale that in producing elite level talent, the SEC and the Big Ten are kings, and we're getting even stronger the last 5 years. So the trend is more. And the other thing that's going to mean is moving forward, the dominance of the SEC and the Big Ten is only going to continue to get stronger as we go forward. That's another big Jeff insight. So JR, any other comments on the table too, and we can open it up to looking at comments?
Yeah, we got some comments from people in the chat, so we'll get to that, and then we can get to the next slide. Pit Snipe Husker says, "Wow, I had no idea the numbers were that damning. Yikes! They're getting better. They're getting better in some cases. We kind of addressed 2024, but yeah, the SEC is far and ahead, better in the NFL, at least the NFL draft. So, I mean, I don't have any argument against that. I argue a lot against the SEC. I don't have any argument against that. It is what it is." The Penn State guy says, F the SEC. They got embarrassed in the bowls. Right. Yeah, that's right. Draft them based on their bowl performance, and we'll see how many how many of them are first round picks. Question for you here, Jeff. Pit Snipe Husker says, Jeff, so how do you think the 2025 draft numbers are going to look? More of the same. We're actually going to look at the 2025 draft numbers after that draft, but you can go ahead and give some thoughts on what do you think that's going to look like, Jeff?
Well, first of all, I think the first round is going to look really good for the Big Ten. I mean, Michigan is going to put 4 or 5 first round draft picks. Ohio State, as loaded as they are, they're not going to have a ton of first round picks. I don't know, JR, what's the speculation? Like a couple at
maybe
least,
one or
right?
two.
Maybe 3 or 4.
Maybe.
I think it's good. It would have been a lot better if Penn State would have released the Hounds a little bit, but they're doing the Ohio State thing this year and retaining. So I think bottom line, first round picks, I think it's going to look good. And then overall, because Ohio State is going to put out a ton of players, I mean, we're talking 14 probably, something like that. I think the
Could
Big
be
Ten
15.
overall figures are going to look great, actually, to
Yeah,
be honest. Yeah. And
I
I'm
agree.
glad you say that. So the plan is when the draft is over, we're going to refresh these tables and do a podcast to do a post-mortem draft and say, how does it look, right? And harken back. So that will be fairly easy for me to do, but it'll be nice to get fresh data, and we're not going to wait. That'll be a few weeks after, within a couple weeks after the draft. We'll plan on doing that on a Thursday night.
Love it. Love it. Um, Joe R says along that line, the documentary Quarterback on Netflix is
Nice.
excellent. I saw that. That was excellent. Did you see that, Jeff?
I have not. I have not. I need
Yeah.
to.
It's
Thanks for.
Marcus
Yeah.
Mariota, Kirk Cousins, and Patrick Mahomes, I believe. Like follows them. They also did a wide receiver one too. That one was interesting too. Pit Snipe Husker once again says, I'd be interested in the bust percentage. The SEC sends more players to the NFL, so naturally they have more quote unquote busts. What's the percentage there? We'll have to try and figure that out at some point. I don't know. That'd probably be a whole lot harder for Jeff to figure out, but
It, it
maybe
is.
maybe at some point.
Yeah. One of the beauties of the draft is it's a it's a it's static in time. Here's the draft, right? You could look at NFL rosters. NFL rosters are so dynamic. To try to track those and really summarize them, that's the challenge, right? Um, and how long someone ends up on an NFL roster is so short as well. So it's a great question. I just don't have a good answer to it. It's hard to get those numbers.
For sure. For sure. And there's opinions on who is a bust, who isn't a bust. So it's
Yeah.
kind of subjective a little bit.